And now, Methodius asked a very controversial question, and that is, are modern Egyptians mostly the same as the ancient Egyptians? And if not, why?
Well, I don't think so because there has been a lot of, as I said, Egypt is a really crossroads of populations. You can imagine, for instance, in the Greco-Roman period, there were tens of thousands of Greeks that were settled in Egypt.
So we got a lot of Arab fairness calling black people culture thieves.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life.
For one, black people can't be culture thieves because we are the culture. We are the most internationally culture appropriated people on the planet. The Arab fairness are projecting their own insecurities on us. They call us culture thieves, yet they don't practice the ancient Egyptian culture, they practice Islam. In reality, they are culture parasites, but we can't be too surprised because they descend from nomadic clans that like to come into already established civilizations and claim the land for themselves. The modern Egyptians, specifically in the Delta, suffer from the "we was always here" effect. It's the same effect that plagued Abos here in the United States. Yet cranial measurements confirm that they wasn't always there and that pre-dynastic Egyptians are linked to Nubians and other tropical adapted Africans. If they are saying that they were already there, then they represent the ancient North Africans that were brutally raped, enslaved, and mixed with invading Eurasian populations. But if that was the case, then why promote so much racist sentiments towards African Americans and other indigenous black Africans? But that's not the case. According to Arab fairness, the ancient Egyptians were always tan-skinned. And they think they confirmed this by the 3 mummies that were tested at El Malik. Yet that study has been brutally criticized by other PhD analysts. One of the reasons being that they suggest the results of the 3 mummies from a later period in northern Egypt represent the ancient Egyptians as an entity came from Asia. The study also claimed that a lot of those haplogroups from the 90 mummies that were tested originated in Asia, which was also untrue and problematic. The authors defined all mitochondrial M1 haplogroups as Asian. M1 has been postulated to have emerged in Africa, and there is no convincing evidence supporting an M1 ancestor in Asia. Today, the so-called modern Egyptians living in the Delta and other parts of Lower Egypt, autosomal DNA is highly mixed with Arabian DNA. When looking at their DNA report, they are under the assumption that the part that says Arabian or Western Asian is up there for decoration.
I got the perfect name for it. Super dummies.
But it's not up there for decoration. It means they cluster with people from Western Asia. They say the demographics were not shifted substantially by large migrations, but that statement could be challenged by the fact that the Amarna mummies had little to no Eurasian DNA, but modern Egyptians from Lower Egypt are highly Eurasian. Could it be that they are the sons and daughters of invaders? One episode of an invasion happened 3,600 years ago when a group of people known as the Hyksos migrated into the Nile Delta to escape famine. The Hyksos were more likely a new elite that emerged locally from a melting pot of immigrants who had moved to the Nile Delta centuries earlier from different parts of the Middle East. It was the descendants of the Middle Eastern immigrants who, during a time of unrest known as the Second Intermediary Period, rose to rule over northern Egypt. So as early as the 12th dynasty, the indigenous Lower Egyptians were mixing with different populations that came from the Middle East. The Hyksos ruled Egypt for over 100 years, but they lived in Lower Egypt for over 400 years. The ancient Egyptians were always under attack from foreigners looking to come into Egypt and lay claims on their civilization, kind of like what modern Arab Egyptians are still doing today. Another invasion that's overlooked happened in the 19th dynasty. Several Syrian immigrants were migrating into Egypt. One Syrian that rose to prominence was a high-ranking official by the name of Chancellor Bey. At the end of the 19th dynasty, Chancellor Bey tried to usurp the throne from the indigenous Egyptians, bringing in several Syrian foreigners, causing chaos and breaking the balance of Ma'at, until Ramses III's father Setneket put an end to the chaotic scene. Another invasion occurred in the 20th dynasty when a group of people known as the Sea People tried to invade Egypt. This wall scene is often used to illustrate the Egyptian campaign against the Sea Peoples in what has come to be known as the Battle of the Delta during the reign of Ramses III. It has been proposed that the Sea People originated from a number of different locations: Western Asia Minor, the Aegean, the Mediterranean islands, and Southern Europe. But according to other scholars, the Sea People were the precursors to the Greeks that came from over the Mediterranean Sea after the fall of Troy. Both Ramses II and Ramses III recorded their victory over the Sea People, so they had to have been lingering around the Mediterranean coast for quite some time. Another invading population were the Romans, who brought in several foreigners and gave them land. These people never left. But due to cognitive dissonance, the modern Arab Egyptians tend to ignore the several waves of invasions in the Nile Delta and claim that they are the standard of what the ancient Egyptians have always looked like, which is unscientific. If the modern Egyptians are not Arab, then that still doesn't take away from the fact that they are Arab looking and are the descendants of populations that invaded the Nile Delta. Every foreigner that invaded Egypt planted their flag and lived in Lower Egypt and never left.
Real Egyptians are black because the real Egyptians, they are real Africans.